Hello, and welcome to this Tiny Methods workshop on writing up qualitative findings. I'm Suraj Uttamchandani. There are many dimensions to writing up research. You have to think really carefully about the genre that you're trying to present, the audience, venue, and constraints. That's something like word count or restrictions on how much data you can show. There's affective components to writing up research, like having a good relationship with your own writing, and artistic aspects, like making the writing compelling, readable, moving, even. And then, of course, there's technical aspects that require a really deep alignment between your analytic approach and methodology and that which you write up. So I think about these technical aspects as what is it that makes the research report trustworthy? So today I'd like to focus on some of these technical aspects, but I'll think across some of these various things. I think writing up research is a really deep and broad topic. I do want to mention that there's a lot of different resources, and I will put these in a list at the end of the PowerPoint, but there are a lot of resources about academic writing in general, writing up qualitative research, writing compellingly, and then I also always encourage people to draw on their favorite art, television shows, books to kind of inspire their writing. As I said, today I'd like to focus on the kind of technical methodological aspects of presenting extracts and how you write around those extracts in ways that your readers might find compelling. But it's really important to remember that what you write up and how you write it up really links to your methodological framework, your theoretical approach. What is it you want to share? And so there is no one way to write up findings. In fact, there's not even just two or three ways. So while today I'll show you some examples of ways that you could write up findings, I don't want to come across as saying that these are the only ways you could construct a findings section. So to quote Kokali Bhattacharya, interpretation of qualitative research involves developing narratives about the ways in which the researcher is co-constructing meaning with her participants. Often this involves analyzing data, looking within various chunks of data, identifying analytical insights, and reflecting on the insights gained through some narrative format. These narrative formats are often rich, thick with contextual details, and help illuminate ideas about the topic the researcher is investigating. Then, when the researcher represents these insights, an alignment with various parts of the study, epistemology, ontology, theoretical framework, methodology, literature review, etc., becomes necessary to maintain rigor in a study. And so here I want to point to the relationship, the really strong relationship between the way that you represent the findings and your overarching theories of the world and methodological approaches. In writing up our findings, there are many, many choices we have to make. And among the first is how you might structure those findings. For example, you could tell a story, you could write a play script, you could do a line-by-line analysis or kind of a broad strokes thematic description. And what you choose should be aligned with your methodology. So again, I really want to drive home this point that a thematic analysis, a discourse analysis, a narrative analysis will look really different from one another. But kind of across these various ways, it's important to think about what kinds of data from your larger data set that you have investigated throughout your research become evidence, that is, the specific pieces of data that you offer to a reader as evidence of the points you're trying to make. So you won't present all the data that you have collected and all the data you've analyzed. You'll present certain pieces that you feel offer a compelling look at the things you're trying to say. And so those are some of the choices you need to make are around the genre of your writing and around which pieces of data, if any, are going to kind of make it into your final write-up. Again, speaking generally, the kind of regardless of how you choose to shape it, there's some ways that you might think about the goals of your findings section that could be helpful. Think about the goal of the findings section as convincing the reader of three things. One, that the data sources you've talked about have been investigated intentionally, with intent. That the research questions you've raised or the points of consideration you've raised have been considered deeply, grounded in a grounded way, and that the interpretations you make of your data are sound or compelling, meaningful, trustworthy. And then, so again, I don't want to say that all of those things need to happen all the time, as much as I want to say that those three things might be a helpful way to think about what it is the finding section is trying to do. The final thing I want to note on a general front is that writing is a process. And in qualitative research, writing finding sections is part of the analytic process. It does not come after analysis is done. It is part of how we analyze. In qualitative research, writing up is part of the analytic process. And as you can see, I really, really want to emphasize this. And so the kind of important takeaway from that is that you will revise writing constantly as you start to write and discover things about your data, discover the nature of the claims you're trying to make, discover the way you want to structure that section. You'll have analytical insights that then make you kind of iteratively go back to that writing and revise it now that you understand what it's trying to do. And so make a lot of space for the writing process in qualitative research and feel comfortable, excited by the idea of kind of going back and refining and revising, as that's part of the clarity that emerges through the writing process. Some things you might risk in a finding section, or some you can think about this as some ways that a finding section might go wrong. It could be that not enough data is presented. It could be that the data is not interpreted sufficiently, or that the interpretation is left too much to the reader. It could be that the interpretations or claims you make about the data don't sit well with your reader because they're hard to follow, or they're not compelling, or they don't really make sense. And it could be that you've chosen extracts in ways that feel arbitrary or unclear to your reader, or the reader is not really sure how to think about your extracts together. And so those are some things you want to be thoughtful about how you might avoid those things, speaking broadly. Now, as I said, in this session, I'd love to focus on the structure of these data analysis sections. I want to walk through two different exemplars. First, one from a more discourse analytic tradition, and then one from a more thematic analysis tradition. But I want to again say that some of this might be applicable in more arts-based traditions or narrative traditions, and some will not. So again, I encourage you to take what is useful and disregard the rest. Now, when writing up an extract analysis, you really should be interpreting and analyzing the extracts that you offer. But sometimes it's not really obvious what we mean by interpretation and analysis, and sometimes those are one thing, sometimes they're two separate things. So I like to think about this as weaving two things together. You want to preview the extract, explain why it was chosen, where in the data set it comes from, how it links to what has come before. You kind of want to justify the extract, give us a preface for it, and then present the extract itself, the raw data, and then discuss the extract in some way. Offer us some rationale now that we've read the extract for making sense of it relative to the other kinds of things you've talked about. Now, to bring back that weaving metaphor, it's really fruitful, I think, to walk the reader through the extract line by line. But here I want to pause. This kind of analysis, the one that I'm about to discuss, is one type of analysis, a line-by-line analysis, that is most common in discourse analysis and conversation analysis kinds of traditions. However, I think line-by-line analysis can be really helpful as a writing exercise for other kinds of methodologies, although it might be less typical to use that analysis in the actual write-up that you present. It might be helpful to think about this as a way to make sense of data at a micro level also. So in terms of how I think about interpretation and analysis in a discourse analytic tradition or a line-by-line tradition, is that once we present a piece of data, we should tell some things that might appear self-evident or obvious, or put in a different way, things that a reader would really easily agree with, things that the reader would say, yes, that makes sense, we're on the same page about what's happening in that data. And then you want to intersperse those claims with things that maybe the reader might not have seen themselves, maybe something that is really clear to you because of your theoretical lens, or because of something you found through your analytic process, or because of something else you know about the data ethnographically. And if you weave those two things together, going back and forth from one to the other, you wind up bringing your reader along with a compelling interpretation and analysis of the data that the reader is inclined to agree with. That weaving together involves both these agreeable things and these new deep insights that are made possible by your having done the research. If you just talk about those self-evident things, people might critique that work as underanalyzed. But if you just offer these theoretical insights that don't seem rooted in the data, people might feel as though you actually aren't investigating the data at hand, or that those claims aren't rooted in any. So I'd like to kind of walk you through an example of a discourse analysis extract. This is from a paper by Gutierrez, Rimes, and Larson, 1995, and they're investigating classroom talk. And so I don't want to walk through the exact text of the extract, but this is right before they present the extract. They're talking about the teacher's cultural script, and then they go up to present the extract. So first, they want to summarize the importance of the previous extract. They kind of create this transition between the last thing they talked about and what's coming. And then they really explicitly rationalize the extract that is coming and explain why that extract shows us something that deepens our understanding of the issue that has been raised. Then the authors present the extract itself. They've already explained their transcription conventions, and in this case, given that this is a discourse analysis study, they've cited those transcription conventions. And then they've used bold type to cue the reader into areas to pay attention to. I'm just going to encourage you to take a moment and read the extract so that we can then make sense of the interpretation. Now they offer kind of one really deep, substantial paragraph that offers an interpretation and analysis of what has come before. In the excerpt above, the very definition of easy ones or default knowledge may be paraphrased as those facts that have appeared on the front page of the LA Times, and so on. Then later, rather, it's the particular cultural context within which it occurs that makes it a relevant question. This teacher expects his students to engage in his cultural practices. And then later, we kind of see, thus, and as will be elaborated below, this presentation of cultural knowledge as if it were universal or world knowledge constructs the students as ignorant. So again, I encourage you to pause and read this section, and I'm going to offer kind of a deconstruction of it now. So we see that throughout, but especially at the beginning, there's direct references to the data using quotation marks, using the words that have already come up. I know that this word world is in quotation marks. That was in the first extract, not the one I just showed you, but you can see that that's part of how the extracts are linked together. Then a separate layer in this analysis is larger information from the ethnographic project, things that the author has made visible through their deep ethnographic or other parts of their methodological investigation. And the rest of what's happening here links to core theoretical ideas, such as cultural context, such as internalized cultural norms, such as monological versus dialogical education. Theoretical constructs that the authors have raised early on in this paper as part of the core idea of the methodological investigation. And so you can see the discourse analysis is constructed through a combination of direct references to the data with aspects of the larger ethnographic or analytic project, and then theoretical interpretations that help us make sense of that specific data. So this is to me an example of that weaving that I was talking about, that is especially common in these discourse analysis approaches that take a really micro look at the data. Now, like I said, this is not at all the only way that you could construct a findings section. So here I want to offer a different way of thinking about it that is more common perhaps in analyses of interviews or thematic analysis investigations. And here you might have extract analyses that are designed to link evidence together, that really explicitly set up extracts so that they speak to one another. They're designed to be read together. It's kind of a collection of layered analysis, various ways of understanding the same point. In this tradition, methodologically, you might focus on these macro interpretations, meaningfulness, relationship between the extract at hand and the previous extracts, the participants they represent, or the overarching theme. And particularly when you have a data source that lends itself to this, such as deep interviews, in these analyses, you might present longer extracts. You might allow participants' own words and phrasings to be centered in the findings. I say allow participants' own phrasings to be centered rather than allow the data to speak for itself. And I say that really intentionally because you do still want to offer some rationale for why we're reading this. Something that makes your findings section different than simply handing your reader the transcripts of your interviews. So I prefer to say allow participants' own words and phrasings to be centered rather than allow participants to speak for themselves for that reason. So this is an example of the discussion of a theme from a thematic analysis by Chad Lockmiller. And again, I don't necessarily expect you to read this, but I invite you to pause and make sense of this. But I want to quickly deconstruct the way that this theme is presented. So we see an overarching point, a first data extract, a second data extract that is kind of interweaved with some analysis. Notice those quotation marks. Then a transition that brings us to the next set of extracts and tells us how those extracts are different or add to or stand out from the ones presented previously. Then a third extract. That third extract gets some analysis, and so on. Now, I do want to kind of zoom in on what I mean by analysis, so I'm going to deconstruct this kind of last extract here for us. But I want to point out that it's really important to be able to read this findings section, read each extract in context with one another. The analysis of a single extract in this tradition really relies on the idea that it's speaking in some way to the previous extract. And so I wanted to show you the whole theme rather than an individual part as I have with the discourse analysis study. So now here, I'm going to similarly deconstruct this section, which is the last extract presented in this theme. So I invite you to pause, maybe read that if you'd like. If not, I'll kind of walk you through. But some of the things we notice immediately as compared to the discourse analysis study is that the extract is an interview, so it's not a script. It seems a lot longer. I want to clarify that, of course, you can have lengthier extracts in discourse analysis studies. It's not like that's not possible, but the extract is left quite large. And you can see that it's a little bit briefer in some ways. More time is spent with the extracts itself than with the analysis thereof. So first, the upcoming extract is introduced by explicitly contrasting it with previous ones. Rather, teachers perceived that administrators with math and science experience often enforce their own views about instruction. So in that way, we're setting up a contrast between the extract that just happened and the extract that is about to come. And the relevance of the data sources is noted here because the author writes, when asked if it was helpful having an administrator. So this is made possible by the interview format, that this extract could be introduced to the question that prompted it. Then, of course, the extract is presented as an extended quote. And then the author presents a broad overview of the meaningfulness of the extract. We can see, as the teacher's comments highlight, even while the administrator had experience in math, the teacher did not view her feedback as being more helpful than other feedbacks she received from colleagues. So you can feel kind of a broad strokes, what is the takeaway from that extract that we just spent time with. In fact, the teacher's comment that the administrator provided feedback based on what she thought should happen suggests that, in some ways, the feedback is actually more of a reflection of the administrator's past experience. So we see that suggests that, offering some interpretation, some way that we can make sense of the talk. What these comments illustrate, then, is that even when an administrator comes from the same subject subculture as the teachers he or she supervises, teachers may still resist the feedback they provide. And so that last sentence offers us a way to understand this extract alongside the previous extracts, which had talked about various administrators and with various subject matters and how they took up these observations, right? We see that the analysis here is relatively brief. It's 3 sentences, but it still offers us a way to make sense of that extract that we feel is trustworthy, as we know that it's against all of these other extracts. That kind of structure is really appropriate for a thematic analysis, where each extract is designed to show us the various ways that the theme is done or constructed, or highlight heterogeneity in the ways that participants think about that theme, that give us a flavor for what is meant by that theme. In this case, the theme was administrators' feedback anchored in their past experiences as teachers, and we see the way that both administrators and teachers from a wide variety of subject areas orient to or think about these feedback processes in terms of that theme, in terms of that anchor to past experiences as teachers. All this to say, there's lots of different ways that you could construct a data analysis or findings section, but all of those ways tend to rely on some combination of offering data and helping the reader sense make around that data. Now, here I'm speaking broadly as always, but I like to think about this as the Evergreen Tree model. In this model, when you're presenting a particular aspect of findings, whether that's a theme, a pattern, an area of investigation, you present a piece of data and you offer interpretation and analysis of that piece of data. Now, as I've said, interpretation and analysis could mean different things based on your methodological tradition. It could be a line-by-line analysis, or it could be links to previous aspects of the theory. It could be links to previous extracts. It could be contextual features of that data that help us make sense of who is saying it and why that's significant. And then once you've presented that, you want to present your next piece of data knowing that the reader has just read that first piece of data. So you're really explicitly offering the reader a guided tour of your data. Now, the reason I like this shape is because you can see that we're kind of widening out from that data. So we start with the data itself, we stay kind of grounded to it, and slowly bring out our lens to bring in things like theory, the research questions, the other extracts. And then we open the next piece of data so we can start to get wider and wider and more coverage. But we need to do it in this iterative way where we constantly are regrounding in data. And then again, you might choose a third extract, you might choose a fourth, a fifth, depending on the data. But you want to choose that next extract knowing that the reader has just read through your discussion of the previous ones, and so on and so forth. And then you might offer a summary of what's just been discussed. You might offer a transition to the next theme or point to help us understand how it's different. But in this way, you ensure that you're constantly building your analysis for the reader in a way that is rooted in data. And so this is for one particular analytic point. And so your finding section might be structured as a series of these stacked trees, a series of analytic points that are brought together, and then perhaps a discussion. And again, don't forget that all of this is preceded by literature review, research questions, a section about your data sources. And so we're just kind of bringing things home with the data. So, speaking broadly about writing qualitative findings, it's really important to consider the aim of the paper. Is your goal to help the reader feel a phenomenon, or even to feel a particular way about a phenomenon? Is your goal to support a reader in understanding some particular environment or space or culture? Is your goal to change the reader's mind about some theoretical construct, or to introduce a theoretical construct that you think the reader might find useful? Clarifying what it is you actually want the findings section to do can also help speak to how you want it to be structured. When in doubt, remember the research question is your lighthouse. I love the lighthouse metaphor. It says when you're out on that sea, you're deep in the data, you're out at sea, you don't quite remember which direction you're supposed to be going. Look for a lighthouse in the form of your research question and let that guide how you might structure these findings. Now here in this presentation, I've offered some technical scaffolds in the form of this weaving, this thematic analysis section. But I really don't want to abandon the artistry. Writing is an art, and so it comes with your ability to bring yourself into your writing. And particularly in qualitative research, it is especially welcomed as you think through things like your positionality and you critically reflect on the research. It is welcome for the writing to have a perspective, a voice, a particular tone, point of view. And so I really would encourage you to use these technical scaffolds as insofar as they are useful, but also don't forget that it's your writing and you want to have a good relationship to it and you want it to reflect who you are. And it is a piece of art that you're creating, and you can think of yourself as an artist if that's helpful. But if that's intimidating or scares you, don't think of yourself that way. Not trying to intimidate. I would really discourage you from self-censoring in your initial writing. I think that's good advice broadly, but it's especially true when we think about writing as part of the analytic process in qualitative research. So that initial writing is part of how you bring the analysis home. And so if you self-censor, you kind of curtail your analysis prematurely. So don't self-censor. Have a document that you call your scrapyard or your garbage doc where you just kind of say what you need to say and see what it is you discover. And if you're stuck, take it bird by bird. Anne Lamont's way of talking about writing is taking it bird by bird. You could take it line by line or even word by word. I like to think about this as karaoke. So if you have an extract, you got this little blue ball that kind of takes us word by word through the extract. That's kind of what you might do if you're feeling stuck for what it might look like to analyze an extract. Now, these are the books and resources I presented at the start. I just want to go ahead and name them. So I, of course, encourage you to draw on your favorite art, television shows, movies, and novels to inspire your writing. The cover I used is for one of my favorite books, The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. I put an asterisk next to the books that I myself have read. The others are ones that have been recommended to me. But there's some books about the academic writing process, like How to Write a Lot, The Writing Workshop, Air and Light and Space and Time. There's some books about methods, such as How to Write Qualitative Research and Writing Up Qualitative Research, and some technical books like Bird by Bird, They Say, I Say. And so these are both books about writing kind of broadly as an art. There are other resources that are worth taking up. I've included a few articles here, as well as the chapter from Kokali Bhattacharya that I cited at the beginning here. These are the citations for the two examples I walked through. Again, I always encourage people to read dissertations. You can read previous IU dissertations for free. All of them are on file there. So go ahead and find dissertations from IU that maybe have committee members in common with you or share your methodological orientation and see how they've structured their findings section. And then, of course, we're always welcome to consult you're always welcome to set up a consultation one-on-one with us to kind of walk through the specific aspects of your research. I wish you well. Please feel free to email Dr. Help if you have any questions. And good luck out there.